welcome in, everyone. We're diving deep into the world of Christian missions today.
Oh, this is a fascinating one.
Yeah, using some excerpts from an academic text that really gets into how mission work has changed and what it's facing these days, particularly in Lutheranism, actually.
Okay, yeah.
And, just to throw something out there right at the start, did you know that North America and Europe, they're now considered mission fields themselves?
Really? Wow.
Yeah, we're going to explore why that is, what that means for, the future of Christianity.
That's a pretty big shift. When we think of missions, we usually think of sending people overseas, right?
Absolutely.
But things are changing. The world's religious landscape, it's not what it used to be. It's really shifting in ways we wouldn't have imagined a few decades ago. Christianity's center of gravity is moving.
Yeah. And the text we're looking at, it throws out this fact that kind of took me by surprise. It says that Africa is now a Lutheran stronghold, experiencing some pretty significant growth, while places like North America and Europe, they're seeing, declines. The book mentions Africa's Lutheran population has surged to over 15 million.
Wow, that's incredible. So what do you think is behind this shift?
Well, it seems like it's multifaceted. I mean, secularization is definitely a factor. Fewer people identify with organized religion.
Right, especially in the West.
Yeah. And then you've got lower birth rates in Europe and North America. That contributes to the decline, while higher birth rates in Africa, they're driving that growth there.
And of course, we can't forget about immigration. That's changing the religious makeup of so many countries.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like we're watching these dominoes fall, reshaping the religious map, right in front of us. You've traveled a lot for your research.
Oh, yeah, all over.
Have you witnessed this shift firsthand?
Absolutely. I was recently in a very bustling city in sub-Saharan Africa. And, new churches were just popping up, felt like on every corner, and there's this vibrancy and energy there. It's palpable. And then you go to Europe and you see these historic churches being turned into, museums, restaurants.
It's wild, isn't it? It really is like we're seeing a complete reversal of roles. The text even goes so far as to call the West mission territory now. It even gives this example of Germany. Germany sending missionaries to its own eastern states because of the largely non-Christian population there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And it's not just limited to Germany. Right. The text points out that even in the U.S., you have this growth of suburbs, immigrant communities, creates all these new mission opportunities.
Yeah, it's like the mission field. It's not some far-off concept anymore. It's right next door. It might even be your own neighborhood.
Speaking of far off, the text brings up this concept of the 1040 window. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, I have.
So it's this geographical band. It goes across North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. It's where most of the world's population lives. And it's also where you find religions like Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism are most prevalent. It's a major focus area for missions.
Yeah, and the source we're looking at, it really highlights the scale of the need in that region.
Yeah.
It states that something like 3 billion people globally are considered unreached by Christianity, many without access to the Bible, even in their own language.
It's staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, it makes you wonder about, how are we allocating resources? You know? What's our strategy when it comes to missions? Because if there's that much need...
Yeah, you'd think we'd see more missionaries going to those areas.
Exactly.
But it's not that simple, is it?
No, not at all. The text, it actually outlines 3 pretty significant roadblocks. And, it's just not as easy as, sending more people, right?
No. Well, let's dive into these obstacles. The first one the text highlights is the misallocation of resources. It says that most missionaries end up in places that are already Christianized.
So wait, instead of sending them to where the need is greatest, we're sending them to where, is more familiar, maybe more comfortable.
It's an interesting point, isn't it? And, the text also ties us to the issue of humanitarian crises. Missions, they often get intertwined with, addressing these really immediate needs like poverty, disease, disaster relief.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's hard to focus on spiritual matters when people are literally fighting to survive, But does that mean that meeting those physical needs somehow, overshadows the core mission of sharing the gospel?
It's a complex issue for sure. While humanitarian aid is definitely vital, the text, it suggests that sometimes it can shift the focus away from the core message. It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah, a constant balancing act.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the reality that In some parts of the world, being a Christian is, well, it's dangerous.
Mm.
The text, it doesn't shy away from the topic of persecution.
No, it doesn't. It's a sobering reality. The text cites a statistic about Christian martyrdom, indicating that thousands are killed every year simply for their faith. Christianity faces opposition, sometimes violence, in various parts of the world.
Yeah, it's a heavy reminder that mission work takes incredible courage
Absolutely.
and commitment. It's
Yeah.
not just, I don't know, a vacation or a photo op.
Yeah.
It can be life-threatening. So these three obstacles, the misallocation of resources, the pull of those humanitarian needs, and then just the reality of resistance and persecution,
Yeah,
they really paint, I don't know, a complex picture.
they do. It's not simple.
So it sounds like even with the best intentions, these real-world challenges, they make mission work incredibly difficult.
They do. And historically, there's been this tension, between this grand vision of global evangelization and then what's actually happening on the ground.
It's like we have these big dreams, but then reality hits.
Exactly. And the text gives this great example. The decade of evangelism back in the 1990s,
Yes.
there was this wave of enthusiasm, resources just poured in. Everyone felt like we were on the verge of something huge.
Right.
But the results, they didn't quite match the expectations.
Thinking back to what we were just talking about,
Yeah.
those obstacles missionaries face, it makes sense.
Yeah.
You've got those misallocated resources, that constant pull to address humanitarian needs. It's like even the best laid plans can get derailed.
Absolutely. I think every missionary, whether they're on a short-term trip or it's their life's work, everyone has to wrestle with this tension between optimism and practicality.
Hmm.
You go in with all this fire, this desire to make a difference, but then you're confronted with just the messiness of the real world.
It's true.
Yeah.
The text doesn't shy away from that messiness. It talks about how mission work is so often intertwined with these huge, social problems.
Yeah.
Poverty, disease, war, natural disasters. It's like missionaries are called to be on the front lines of human suffering.
And that's a heavy burden to carry. The text even uses the word calamities at one point to describe what Christians and non-Christians are facing in many parts of the world. So it's not just about sharing the gospel, Right. It's also about meeting these really basic, really real needs, offering comfort in the midst of suffering.
Yeah, it makes you think about, like, how do you even begin to balance those things, the
Yeah.
spiritual and the physical? They seem so, I don't know, interconnected.
Well, I think it speaks to the holistic nature of the gospel, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about the soul, it's about caring for the whole person. Physical, emotional, spiritual needs, all wrapped together.
That makes a lot of sense. And it makes me think about what the text says about empowering local leaders. I mean, it seems like it would be so much more effective to have people who understand the community, who are living those challenges every single day, to have them take the lead.
I think that's a key point, moving away from this top-down approach. Recognizing that each culture, each people group has its own dignity, its own wisdom.
Yeah.
It's not about us imposing our ways. It's about walking alongside them, learning from them, supporting them as they lead.
It's a much more humble approach, I think.
It is.
More respectful than what we've seen historically.
Definitely.
But the text does point out, this approach isn't without its own set of challenges.
You're right. It talks about how some churches, especially in places like Japan, they've pushed back against that foreign influence, They've even called for, pauses on mission work, essentially saying, hey, we need to figure this out for ourselves.
It's like they're reclaiming ownership of their faith.
Exactly. After centuries of colonialism, cultural imposition, the text uses the term paternalism to describe this dynamic, where missionaries, often with good intentions, they ended up in this role that was more about control than partnership.
And as you said earlier, that creates resentment, makes it harder to build that trust, to have a genuine partnership.
Absolutely. Undoing that damage, moving towards a more equitable approach, that takes time. It takes humility, a willingness to really listen and learn, to let go of our preconceived notions of how things should be done.
We can't just come in with all the answers. We need to be open to learning from the people we're trying to serve.
And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back, give space for these local communities to find their own expression of faith.
That can be tough for people who are really passionate about sharing their beliefs. Right?
I know, and you want to see the gospel spread, but true partnership requires letting go of that need to control.
It seems like finding that balance between sharing the gospel and respecting the agency of others is so key.
It is. It's a delicate dance, And the text, it does a great job of highlighting all those complexities. It's not always easy or pretty, but it's deeply meaningful work.
And throughout all of this, the text keeps coming back to the fact that even as the methods are changing, the core message, that stays the same.
That's the heart of it all.
It's about sharing the hope and the salvation found in Jesus Christ.
It's about pointing people to the one who offers forgiveness, healing, and transformation. And that message, it's timeless. It transcends cultures, transcends languages.
Yeah, I mean, the text makes it clear. The mission field, it's everywhere. We may not all be called to pack our bags and move overseas, but that doesn't mean we're off the hook.
Oh, absolutely not. These changes we talked about in the religious landscape, it's not just happening over there. It's happening right here in our own communities. And that need for mission work, for sharing the message of the gospel, it's probably greater now than it's ever been.
One thing that really stood out to me in this text is how it challenges our assumptions about what a missionary even is. It feels like those lines are getting blurrier.
I think you're right. What does it even mean to be a missionary in today's world? Is that term even relevant anymore?
It's a good question. Does the text offer any insights?
It's interesting. It suggests that there might not be a single universally accepted definition anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. It allows for a wider spectrum of involvement, welcomes people from all walks of life to find their own way to share the Christian message.
So are we moving away from this rigid definition and embracing a more fluid understanding of what it means to participate in missions?
I think so. While the methods might evolve, the core focus, that remains the same.
We've covered a lot of ground in this first part, from those global trends to those complexities of modern missions. It feels like we're at a real turning point.
We are. And the question the text leaves us with, it's a very personal one. If every Christian is called to be a missionary in some way, what does your mission field look like?
That's something for all of us to consider. We've only scratched the surface today, and there's so much more to discover. So stick with us as we continue this deep dive into the ever-evolving world of Christian missions.
Yeah, and this text, it doesn't just give a dry overview of missions.
No,
It grapples with the complexities and even some of the tensions in missions work. And one thing that stood out to me was this this whole idea of mission optimism versus the practical realities on the ground.
Yeah, it's like this historical tug of war between these big dreams of, reaching the whole world for Christ and then the boots on the ground reality of what missionary life is actually like. And sometimes those two things don't quite line up.
No, they don't. And the text gives a really good example. The decade of evangelism back in the 1990s. There was this wave of enthusiasm, tons of resources. People really felt like something huge was about to happen. But as the text points out, the results, they didn't really meet those expectations.
And thinking back to what we were talking about earlier, the obstacles that missionaries face, I can see how, even the best laid plans, they can go off track. When you've got misallocated resources, that constant need to address humanitarian issues.
Exactly. And I think this whole tension between the optimism and then the practicality is something every missionary has to wrestle with. Whether you're going on a short-term mission trip or you're making this your career, you go in with this fire in your heart, you want to make a difference, but then you run into the messiness of the real world.
Yeah. And the text really doesn't shy away from that messiness. I mean, it talks about how so often mission work is, intertwined with all these massive social problems. Poverty, disease, war, you name it.
Natural disasters.
Yeah, it's like missionaries are, they're called to be on the front lines of human suffering.
Yeah. And the text, it uses the term calamities to describe, what both Christians and non-Christians are facing. So it's not just about sharing the gospel, is it? It's about meeting these basic needs, offering comfort in the midst of suffering. It's a heavy burden to carry.
Makes you think about, how do you even balance those things?
Yeah.
The spiritual and the physical. They seem so connected.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, this holistic idea of the gospel. It's not just about saving souls, It's about caring for the whole person, body, mind, and spirit.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to this idea of empowering local leaders. I mean, wouldn't it be more effective to have people who really understand the needs of their community, who are living those challenges every day, to have them be the ones to lead?
Absolutely. That's what makes moving away from that top-down approach so important. Recognizing that each culture, each people group has its own dignity, its own wisdom. We're not here to impose our ways. It's about walking alongside them, learning from them, supporting them as they lead.
Yeah, and that image, walking alongside, it feels more, well, humble,
It is. It is.
more respectful than what we've seen, historically. But the text does point out that even this approach has its own challenges.
Right, right. It talks about, how some churches, places like Japan, for example, they've pushed back against that foreign influence.
Yeah?
They've even called for pauses in mission work. They're basically saying, look, we need to figure this out on our own.
It's like they're reclaiming ownership of their faith.
Exactly. After centuries of colonialism and cultural imposition, the text calls it paternalism. Missionaries, often with good intentions, end up in this role where it's more about control than partnership.
And as we said before, that breeds resentment, makes it really hard to build that trust, to have a real partnership.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Undoing that damage, moving towards a more equitable approach, it takes time. It takes a lot of humility, being willing to really listen and learn, letting go of how we think things should be done.
Right. We can't just show up with all the answers, can we? We have to be open to learning from the people we're trying to serve.
And honestly, sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step back, give space for these local communities to find their own expression of faith.
Yeah, that can be a tough thing to swallow for people who are really passionate about sharing their beliefs.
Oh, I know. You want to see the gospel spread.
But it's about trust.
It is. It is. True partnership, it requires letting go of that need to control.
So it seems like finding that balance between, sharing the gospel and respecting that other people have their own agency, that's really key.
It is. It's a delicate balance. And the text, it does such a good job of highlighting all of that. It's not always easy, not always pretty, but it's deeply meaningful work.
And, throughout all of this, the text keeps reminding us that even as the methods change, the core message, that stays the same.
That's the heart of it.
Sharing the hope and the salvation that we find in Jesus Christ.
Right. Pointing people to the one who offers forgiveness, healing, transformation. And that message, it's timeless. It transcends cultures, transcends languages.
Yeah, the text makes it clear. The mission field, it's everywhere. We might not all be called to, move overseas, but that doesn't mean we're off the hook.
No, absolutely not. We were talking about those changes in the religious landscape. It's not just happening over there. It's happening right here in our own communities.
Right here at home.
And the need for sharing the gospel, I think it's greater than ever before.
One thing that really struck me about this text is how it really makes us rethink what a missionary even is. I mean, it's like those lines are getting blurred,
It's true. It's almost like, what does it even mean to be a missionary these days? Is that term even relevant anymore?
Yeah. Does the text offer any insights into that?
It suggests that there might not be one definition anymore, one that everyone agrees on. And, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe it means that more people can get involved, people from all different backgrounds, all finding their own ways to share that Christian message.
So it's less about a rigid definition and more about, a fluid understanding of what it means to participate.
I think so. The methods might keep changing, but the core focus, that stays the same.
Yeah. So much to think about, isn't there? And we've only just begun to unpack it all. The global trends, the complexities of modern missions. It really feels like we're at a turning point.
We are. We are. And the text, it leaves us with a question, a really personal one. If every Christian is called to be a missionary in some way, what does your mission field look like?
That is a powerful question. And I think it's one that all of us need to wrestle with. But for now, we're going to take a little break. And when we come back, we'll dig even deeper into this evolving idea of missions and what it means for us. So we're back. And, this whole conversation about missions, it's really got me thinking about what it means to be a missionary in today's world.
It's a question a lot of people are wrestling with, and
Right.
for me, I keep coming back to this tension between the global need and then that very personal nature of faith.
Yeah, it's like we're being pulled in two directions. Outward to the needs of the world, but also inward toward our own spiritual growth.
And that's where the text's emphasis on empowering those local leaders, that really resonates with me. It's suggesting that, effective mission work often starts small, at the grassroots level.
So instead of just imposing our own, westernized approach, it's more about equipping people to share their faith in ways that resonate with their own culture.
Exactly. The text even mentions this triangular strategy where, say, churches in the West might partner with churches in other parts of the world to send missionaries to regions where maybe, Westerners wouldn't be as welcome.
So the face of missions is changing, becoming more diverse, more representative of the global body of Christ.
And I think that's a really positive thing. It acknowledges that the church, it's universal. We all have something to offer, something to learn from each other.
Yeah. It's not about, the West going in to save the rest of the world. It's about recognizing that God's already at work everywhere, and we're just invited to join him.
And that's what I appreciate about how this text defines mission. It really boils down to pointing people to Jesus, to the hope and the salvation we find in him.
So less about rules and more about sharing a message of, love, forgiveness, transformation.
It's a message that resonates with people no matter their background. It speaks to those deep longings that we all have. That search for meaning, for purpose, for connection.
And, as we've been talking, I keep coming back to that question the text asks. What does my mission field look like? And I'm realizing it's not just about geography. It's much broader than that.
Yeah. It's like every interaction, every relationship, every moment, it all becomes an opportunity to share God's love.
So it's not just about, going on a mission trip or sending money. It's about being a missionary in our everyday lives, how we treat our family, our neighbors, the people we work with.
Right. It's about letting our faith shine through in a way that, it draws others to the source of that light.
That seems like the most powerful form of missions.
Yeah.
It's not about programs. It's not about strategies. It's about the gospel lived out in those real, genuine relationships.
And I think that's what this text is getting at. The church, it's at its best when it's engaged in the world, sharing God's love in word and in deed.
Being a beacon of hope.
Yeah.
A force for good, for justice, for compassion.
It's a mission that we can all embrace. And it's challenging, but it's also deeply rewarding.
Yeah. It pushes us out of our comfort zones, to embrace the messiness of the world, to be the change we want to see.
And it all comes back to Jesus.
I'm walking away from this conversation with a real sense of urgency, but the gospel gives me so much hope.
And I think that's a great place to leave it. I hope everyone listening feels that same urgency and that same hope. Ask yourself, what does my mission field look like? How am I called to share God's love? And then take action.
We've only scratched the surface of this topic, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a new perspective on missions. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time when we'll explore another thought-provoking topic.